Are you aware that I'm only 11 years old?
I've already met the world. It's your turn.
Boy Meets World and Fresh Prince were essentially the formative shows of my entire childhood. Despite the animation content on this channel, despite the Office videos, it is really these two shows that generated so much interest for me in writing and directing, as weird as that sounds. And both of those are shows that I think come around maybe once in a generation, or in this case, kind of separated by 10 years twice. On the surface, Boy Meets World, however, is a sitcom that's very simple. On the surface and underneath, it's a sitcom about a boy and a group of friends who navigate a simple town and a simple school. But underneath all that simplicity, the show was able to do something that so many pieces of entertainment fail at. It was able to place you with this group of kids as they grew, and importantly, as you did too. From 1993 until the final episode on May 5th, 2000, we followed Corey Matthews as our vessel into this very long journey. He was your average everyday 6th grader at the start of the show's run, and by the end of it, he was returning as an adult to the very same classroom, seeing the very same teacher that was essential in shaping and molding Corey just as much as maybe the audience's lives. But to fully understand this impact here, following 7 seasons of Corey, Sean, Eric, Topanga, you would have had to be invested in the show from the start. That is something very unique. See, building an attachment to characters is something that every writer hopes that you do, but accomplishing it comes through one simple element: relatability. Whether you can see yourself or the people you know on the screen. The connection a writer wants you to have while watching a show that ages with its core audience is a show that changes the way you view it as it runs. As you mature and deal with more life situations, Boy Meets World, for instance, does the same. The show found a way to consistently meet the viewer on the same playing field, which allowed it to never feel stale and essentially make each new season a completely new show, with new life lessons, new social dilemmas, making it increasingly more adult as these kids became adults. What this means is that a show does not continue to require a need for nostalgia. Essentially, you don't need to go back and watch the first 3 seasons and see yourself as a kid again. Instead, well, your first introduction to cigarettes, for example, might be Corey's as well, or vice versa, which makes you feel like you're a part of this process. That's the point of a show about people instead of about concept. Boy Meets World mastered this. But aside from this factor, what made the show special enough to warrant keeping that show going long enough to see these characters grow is, well, it did the opposite of what some other shows may have done and what we've seen other shows do. And I just touched on it. These kids didn't have a secret power, a double life, or a survival guide to help them navigate school or life. Instead, they were completely and utterly alone in the world. Average. Nothing to guide or help them outside of people. Average people. In this sense, you could be this person. Your friend could be like one of them. You may have had a teacher like Feeney. And so once again, that relatable immersion comes into play. You can place yourself in this world because it was real. You recognize it. It was a group of kids dealing with life through these years of their lives, just as you were and the people around you were. And this was only accomplished because the show understood what it was and didn't stretch itself too thin. Despite some of Eric's antics in the later seasons, for the most part, this was an incredibly grounded show. There was no moment where you have Ashley Banks on stage becoming a superstar in one episode, or Vivian becoming a ballroom dancer. It was, well, not that. And as much as I love Fresh Prince, it wasn't always about relatability in the same way that Boy Meets World maintained focus. That focus being on things that resonate acutely with the audience, perhaps more than any other kid and teen show on TV at the time or since. It understood its audience and in turn was able to adapt. Instead of an episode about a first kiss, we got an episode about consummation. Instead of an episode about mommy grounding Corey, it became an episode about mommy not agreeing with his marriage choices. That's a big risk, especially because you're essentially alienating the original intended audience, right? That's what networks are always so afraid of. Once you have an audience, it's about keeping it. It's almost never about bringing in a new one with Boy Meets World, but in a traditional show, that's all it's about, right? How can we bring in more people? How can we bring in new faces, new eyes? Boy Meets World was absolutely unconcerned with this reality. Bringing in new people didn't mean bringing in the same people that started watching season 1. It meant bringing in people that maybe at a point in their life where season 3 made sense, or 4 or 5. And that requires an immense amount of talent in a writer's room, because they don't just have to understand a 6th grader's mentality, they have to understand a 7th, 8th, 9th college student, and so on and so forth. You'd be hard pressed to find someone who grew up in the 90s who was not only a fan of this show, but who wasn't heavily affected by it in some way, and used some lesson to deal with the similar themes presented to them in their lives. Boy Meets World aired on ABC, a network owned by Disney, by the way, that wasn't as heavily restricted to just being for kids or cartoons. That's important, it allowed that growth. Clearly, the show was a massive hit for the company. It completely shaped the landscape for kids and teens journeying through adolescence in that era. So much so that 14 years later, after Boy Meets World ended, Disney decided to bring the show back in a way that they felt would be fresh. A revival series called Girl Meets World. It would focus on Corey's daughter, Riley, and her friends and family and everything we would come to love about Boy Meets World. But see, despite the way this video started, it's really about a change in the industry, specifically in television, and really in film as well. See, in Girl Meets World, we'd see all the original show's cast members make cameo appearances or bit roles to support the new show, and it did a fair job of standing on its own. It was a good show. A good show meant to bring in new viewers, but a good show that also was meant to appeal to the people that enjoyed Boy Meets World to begin with, a dose of nostalgia. But Disney changed. Television changed, film changed. Disney didn't feel like it could recapture the same lightning in the bottle of Girl Meets World that Boy Meets World did, because Disney didn't want to take the risk of expanding its subject matter with its audience. Rather than following Riley after the first 3 seasons into a new generation of issues, into high school, into college, well, Disney decided to not age up the characters or the shows past middle school, giving the show those 3 seasons and canceling it by the start of 2017, despite good ratings and good reviews. Since Girl Meets World was on Disney Channel rather than ABC, Disney felt that going any further would be pushing the series outside of their target demographic. Old fans, new fans, you name it, were displeased with Disney for this move and campaigned for networks and streaming services like Netflix to step in and help keep the show alive, save it, and let it see out its full potential. But problematically, as most of you are already aware, Disney is incredibly controlling with their IP, and most of the time would rather see it die than let it into another's hands. Sometimes for better, and in this case, probably for worse. Girl Meets World, much like Boy Meets World, gave us a depiction of an average kid growing up through, well, everything. And the show, Girl Meets World, was praised for how well it did the same thing for an average girl as Boy Meets World did for, well, a boy. On speaking about how shocking cancellation was, Janelle Okudo, a reporter for Vogue, was quoted as saying it meant one less realistic depiction on screen of what it means to be a young woman. So what does all this have to do with changes in the industry? Well, there was a time when companies understood that their audience was the most important thing in the world. The audience they have now, not necessarily the audience they might have in the future. Specifically in television, this meant shows that understood and got better as they went because they were aware of what was expected not just of them, but of their characters. There was a time when it wasn't so risky to age a show up for a new audience, when it wasn't so risky to respect your characters and your audience enough to grow with them. There was a time when it wasn't risky to stick with something that worked and something people loved, when an extra percentage in a profit margin didn't overwhelm all of that in the thought processes of networks and studios. That time isn't now. That time is long gone. And that means that the impact of shows like this won't exist. Boy Meets World gave us this realistic look into what it's like to grow up. It gave us something to relate to feel comfortable within. And Girl Meets World did the exact same thing, albeit, without the risk. And it's easy to look back fondly on a show like Boy Meets World, what it represents, how well it translated to the age of its audience and continued to translate, and the legacy it left behind. That being average can be special. That you don't need to be someone you saw on TV doing things you couldn't do. You didn't need a quirk to stand out from the rest of your peers. You didn't need to be rich or have superpowers. Just because you didn't have things figured out didn't mean you weren't good enough. It was okay to just be good. Unfortunately, today, in art, in television, and film, being good, being loved, it's not celebrated quite so much. It gets you thrown out with the trash, and something new replaces you. I don't love that message. Not for artists, not for kids, not for adults. But just know if you're lost in the sea of all of that, on streaming services, on DVD, there's still a boy and a girl out there meeting the world with you. It might be worth taking the journey with them, still, all these years later.
Class dismissed.
Well guys, that's it for today's episode of Nerdstalgic. If you enjoyed this video, press the like button down below. If you haven't yet done so, also hit subscribe. And yeah, as always, hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video.
Well done, Mr. Matthews.